Nearly every time we deliver a new wooden instrument to a client, we have to have the talk. Not that talk. This is a different talk. This is a talk about climate control over the entire life cycle of the instrument. When I say climate control, I'm really talking about two factors, the temperature and the humidity. It's actually more complicated than that even, because it's not just about the ambient conditions in the case or in the space where you have the instrument. You have to think about the tension between the ambient conditions and what you're introducing inside of the horn. For instance, right now in this room, it's roughly 73 degrees and a little over 50% relative humidity. But if I were to start blowing into this instrument right now, we're talking about in the ballpark of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit for the air temperature and probably close to 100% relative humidity. That's just the nature of human breath. So you've got a 25-degree gradient in temperature between what's in the room and what's inside the horn, not to mention probably 30, 40, even 50% difference in relative humidity between what's inside the horn and what's outside the horn. So all of these stresses compound when you're working with the instrument to create these tensions which cycle over time. You take a cold instrument, you start to blow warm air into it. The inside of the bore wants to swell at the same time that the outside of the instrument is trying to hold or even potentially shrink. A lot of times that's where cracks can start to come from. Even more the case when the transition is sudden. So if you take a very cold instrument and instantly start blowing warm air into it, it's not like brass. The tensions will find a way to release if you stress the wood too hard. I'm sure most of you have encountered this either directly yourselves or have had colleagues where this has been the case, where bringing an instrument in off the subway and then taking it out on stage. Or I've heard horror stories about people playing concerts and shows where somebody opens the stage doors to let the heat off the stage during intermission. And that sudden change from very warm to cool or from very cool to warm could result in tensions releasing in a very, very unfortunate way for the instrument. So then the question is, how do you regulate that? And some of that is just a matter of discipline, being very mindful of those tensions and the conditions, again, in the space when you start to play the instrument, but also as you're moving from space to space. And there are ways that you can manage that to a certain degree. There's some really interesting instrument cases which can help to build up layers of protection and insulation, both in terms of moisture, but temperature as well. And then there are some other techniques that we use with our inventory to be able to manage the conditions in the case so that the wood at least has a stable point. So we maintain a very specific temperature for the storage of our instruments, usually in the low to mid 70s within our climate-controlled room. And then we target between 35 and 45% relative humidity for the long-term storage of the instruments. But the reality is just in free air, it's not always so easy to do that. So as I mentioned, we look for in-case solutions as well. I'm all about low maintenance and low probability of errors. So there are actually a lot of pretty useful systems out there for managing humidity inside of an instrument case. It might involve keeping sponges wet or tubes filled with water, different ideas like that. But that requires something that I'm myself not particularly good at, and that is keeping up with it on a day-to-day basis. What we use at Professional Wind Instrument Consultants is actually the Boveda two-way humidity packets, because these things, you can drop them in an instrument case and they're going to be good for 3 to 6 months. And what's interesting about these, and this is how they come in a sealed packet, so they're not activated until they're exposed to air. It's a two-way system. So the target is 49% relative humidity, but that can go both directions. If it's an extremely dry period, or if it's just dry in the case and the humidity is falling below 49%, it will actually add humidity to the air inside of the contained area. And then the converse of that is if it's exceedingly humid, it will take humidity out, it will get absorbed into the solution inside of this packet, and draw it down to 49%. Now, it's not going to be dead precise, but it's going to get pretty close. So you're maintaining a good stasis kind of environment for humidity, and then it's up to you either just how you're keeping the case, or if you buy one of the cases that has heating elements in it to maintain a reasonably consistent temperature, in short intervals of time as well as over longer periods of time, because humidity is relative. And as the temperature goes down, if the same amount of moisture is in the air, at the lower temperatures, that relative humidity is actually higher, and then vice versa. If the air inside of the case is getting warm, let's say that you're outside in direct sun, the relative humidity is actually dropping because the carry capacity of the air is going up. So this is a good way to account for those kinds of challenges. This kind of case makes it fairly easy to manage humidity because the instruments are actually essentially floating in free air. They're just held up by the sockets and tenons, but there's nothing actually in contact with the wood other than that. So there's actually an ambient environment around the joints that makes it possible to fairly easily manage humidity within that space. So it's just a matter of taking one of these two-way humidity packets, putting it somewhere where it's not in direct contact with the wood, if you can avoid it, and then go on about your business. Close it up, and the packet just sits there doing its two-way work, keeping the interior humidity of the case at roughly 49% relative humidity. Different kinds of cases pose different sorts of challenges as well. When we're dealing with clarinets, a lot of the instruments are delivered with cases which are actually form-fitting and lined so that there really is very little air circulating around the joints when it's closed up, which also means that it might be a little bit more challenging to position one of these humidity packets. Usually what we do is we take it and we roll it up and put it maybe in one of the open mouthpiece slots, or in a pinch we might lay it across the bell or something like that. It's not ideal, but at least it's inside of the enclosed space of the case, again, doing its thing of managing the humidity to that 49% target. There are a lot of details and factors to keep track of when maintaining the climate environment in and around your instrument. So usually what we advise is this: if you're comfortable, your instrument is comfortable. It doesn't have to be much more complicated than that. If we're talking about a wooden clarinet or a wooden piccolo, wooden oboe, bassoon, they're made out of wood. Wood is organic material. You're made out of organic material. So just approach it from that point of view. 49% is enough to keep the wood hydrated, but not waterlogged, which is important if you want to manage for mold and other things that frankly are a risk when the instrument stays a little bit damp over long periods of time. You don't want your case to get funky. You don't want the instrument to get funky. At the same time, 49% keeps the humidification of the wood in reasonable proximity to where it's going to end up when you start blowing air through it, so you don't end up with these extraordinary tensions between the static humidification of the wood and what you're going to be driving through the interior of the bore as you're playing it. The Boveda two-way system is really easy to use. It's low maintenance. You can set it up in your case and really not have to fiddle with it for long periods of time. There are other applications for two-way humidity control as well, which we'll get into in future videos. But for right now, we're just covering what we're doing with our own inventory in order to make sure that the instruments are in a good static state in terms of both temperature as well as relative humidity over time. And we hope you consider doing the same for your instruments.